Okay, I need a quarter. So your phone, the call-in line is 455502. And oh boy, number 2614133 pound and enter 1 pound. Call. Sorry, 261711333. Okay, very cool. Start?
Yes.
See, Shashi, are you online? Okay. Folks, let me just make sure that we're good here. If you called in, welcome. My name is Robert Gundrup. I'm with the Southern California Association Nonprofit Housing or SCAMP. And welcome to today's special webinar, the Cornfield Arroyo Seco Design or CASP, an innovative model for use and use tools to find 100% affordable developments and incentivize affordable homes and market rate developments. We have two special speakers today. We have Shashi with Public Counsel, and Public Counsel itself is the largest pro bono law firm in the nation. It's an organization which is headquartered here in Los Angeles. We also have Sissy Tran, who's with SEACA, the Southeast Asian Community Alliance. And the SEACA mission is to build power among Southeast Asian youth in their communities in Los Angeles for a more just and equal society through interracial, multi-ethnic dialogue, leadership development, and community organizing. So I just want to welcome both Shashi and Sissy. And what I'm going to do now is hand over the presentation to Sissy Tran. You have it?
Buddy. Again, thanks, Robert, for setting all of this up, and Marisa also. We're just going to give you a general overview of the neighborhood itself, and then Shashi will talk about the specifics of the plan and how it impacts affordable housing development. Opportunity for question and answer on the latter half of this webinar. Give you a little background. Background with the CASP. Originally, the plan was developed in, I believe, 2007, and the idea was to experiment with a new model for development. So moving away from traditional suburban sprawl to more transit-oriented, mixed-use developments. Turning LA from the car capital of the country to more innovative New York-style kind of development. Before we get to what the plan wanted to build, it's kind of important to provide context for what already exists. So Lincoln Heights is actually the oldest neighborhood in the city, and so what that means is that a lot of the planning that happened over the time of the last 100 or so years wasn't a lot. So a lot of spot zoning in the neighborhood, and so you'll see in this slide, a sign that says "Warning Forklift Traffic" down the street from a fairly narrow single-family residential neighborhood. We're also surrounded by 3 freeways and about a dozen secondary highways, as well as factories, rail yards, and then what I like to consider, we're the city's parking lot. So you'll see LAUSD, Metro, Fire Department, LAPD vehicles parked here all the time. We all have a lot of health risks. Actually, top 5% most pollution burden according to the Cal Enviro screen. Really diverse. So we have about 2/3 Latino, 30% Asian or 29% Asian, and then a mix of other communities. We have about half a dozen different languages spoken, primarily Spanish, and then Chinese, Vietnamese, and Cambodian. We're also incredibly transit rich. In addition to being surrounded by 3 freeways, we have 3 Metro Gold Line stations, where a couple blocks from Union Station, and then also close to Metro bus lines and city bus lines. What that means is that 40% of residents in the community actually commute by means other than driving. And SEACA actually did a survey of residents and found that about 30% of Chinatown working adults actually walk to work, which is huge in LA. And so overall, again, the plan itself was to do this mixed-use development, the idea being getting people out of their cars and onto transit, reducing greenhouse gases. Part of that was to kind of think about, you have a density community, how to get more livable, right? Part of it is having the mixes, like I said, so you could walk to your cafe or walk to the grocery store, but it was also to increase access to open space. And environmental strategies were actually a really strong component of the plan when we first got involved. So part of the plan requires a 15% open space requirement for the lot area, in addition to incentivizing pocket parks throughout the region. And, the plan itself try to increase bicycle and pedestrian mobility, so they have some bicycle parking opportunities as well, or requirements. And then the idea was to increase density near transit. And so when we got first involved, they set the original base density for the neighborhood was 1.5 FAR, or about 50 units per acre, and then they doubled the density to about 3.0 FAR. But so just to kind of give you a sense of the community that we operate in, on this slide you can see that the median income in Chinatown and Lincoln Heights is very low, or actually it's extremely low income. Income in Chinatown is about $19,000 a year for a household, and then for Lincoln Heights it was about $25,000. Basically what that means is that a lot of our folks are too poor for affordable housing. They fall in the extremely low income category, but they don't necessarily qualify for supportive housing. But it was coming down. So you can see in this slide, the median household incomes between 2000 and 2010. The darker the green, the higher the income. And so you look at 2000, and it's a mix of incomes. Most of it ranges from below $25,000 a year up to about a max of around $80,000. And then by 2010, there's a lot more green and a lot more dark green. And dark green signifies income $80,000 and above. Know that this is gentrification and not necessarily new construction because, for example, in Solano Canyon, which is an area that's bound next to Dodger Stadium, essentially, there were maybe a dozen new developments plus one apartment building that was so it was definitely like residents buying or renting, that were coming in that were substantially higher incomes. Going back to CASP, when we started back in 2009, so the plan itself was developed in 2007, or in the process of developing in 2007, and when we started getting involved, it was 2009. And so just to kind of give you a sense of what CASP would have built, the idea was really to focus on incentivizing market rate developments, and the market rate developments you build, the less pressure there is on housing prices overall for market rate people. That the idea was that more housing meant lower prices, but it didn't really do anything for most people who are extremely low income. And so would have built for subsidized affordable housing overall would have been zero. And so I'm going to start talking about the specifics of the plan, and again, the version that we found in 2009 versus the final proposal based off of our organizing and advocacy.
Thanks, Lucy. So I'm assuming that you can hear me. Great. Thanks, everyone, for coming in. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and describe a broad review of the affordable housing provisions in the plan. And to start, just comparing it with where we stood in 2009 per this slide. and where we ended up in terms of what was adopted in August of 2013. So just as you can see, the final plan removes all minimum and maximum parking requirements. The final plan maintains, this is on the slide necessarily, it's on the third sort of row, but maintains the base density for residential in the urban village part of the plan, which is where primarily residential is sort of being planned to go at a 1.5 FAR, and offers corresponding increases in FAR where a developer agrees to provide affordable housing. To give a little bit more detail on that, generally a developer providing between 11 and 20% affordable housing, that would be like an 11% set aside at 50% AMI, or 20% at 8% AMI, would get bumped up to an FAR of 3. And a developer providing 100% affordable housing, as long as it's affordable at 80% AMI or below, would get bumped up to an FAR of 4. So keep in mind that in the CASP area, there's no sort of unit per square foot limitation or height limitation, so FAR is the primary determinant of density. There's also an alternative incentive strategy provided in the CASP, which provides for additional square feet. For example, if a developer in the first 5 years of the plan offered extremely low-income housing at 30% AMI, for every 1 square foot of that type of housing being provided, the developer would get an additional 18 square feet of market rate space, and there would be the corresponding additional square feet of market rate space based on the income levels. So 18 square feet for LI, 30 square feet for very low income at 50% AMI, and 5 square feet for low income at 80% AMI. So,
this is for market rate developers, not for 100% affordable developers. And also the numbers actually get reduced after 5 years. So instead of 18 square feet, you get 9 square feet density bonus.
Yeah, so after 5 years, all square footage incentives that I just described would be cut in half. And that's part of the plan, early adopter incentive, in which basically if you build in the first 5 years after adoption of the plan, you are able to get additional square feet if you are a market rate developer that's agreeing to provide some affordable housing. So I go to the next slide, and then just keep in mind that I know this is a lot of sort of dense information, so we will have the opportunity for questions. Thank you. Just to give you an idea of the basis for the numbers on which these set-asides were based, Kaiser Marston analyzed the incentive-based structure they offered. Numbers were also analyzed by Joan Ling, many of whom you know, and the chart that we've attached shows a couple things. The first is that an FAR combined with the reduced parking that's already in the plan with land value increases in return on equity. So just looking across sort of this land value, which is the first row, you see that as the FAR increases, the land value increases. And you also see that comes a corresponding return on equity. And so Kaiser Marston looked at, okay, what happens if the developer puts some of that return on equity back into the project? Found that even with a 50% contribution, you have pretty respectable return equity of 10%. The note that I wanted to make about this part is the incentive that at some point was being discussed, but that was ultimately adopted, which from a 3 to a 4 FAR wouldn't have worked based on these arguments. And as you can see, when you just look down the column from 3 to 4, the return equity goes down. And that's partially because of the increased costs of construction at that level. But what was really an important sort of takeaway from all of this is that the most meaningful incentive as measured by return on equity, was from 1.5 to 3. It's the incentive that is contained in the CASP in the urban village residential area. And that 1.5 to 3 is where we would expect to see housing being provided. So we'll move on to the next slide. This is sort of getting into some development standards and opportunities that exist in finance housing. We already talked a little bit about incentives based on FAR for market and affordable developers. Just as a reminder, if you're a 100% affordable developer in this area, you will get an FAR of 4 and no parking maximum minimums. Now, it's possible as an affordable developer, 100%, that you won't use that you won't use all that FAR. So the plan provides for a transfer FAR provision, allowing for the sale of excess FAR by anyone who has excess FAR to a receiver site within the specific plan area. And if you're a 100% affordable developer, you may actually have that excess FAR, and you actually have you may build to 3 an additional 1 floor area ratio FAR that you could sell based on the number of square footage of your lot. Now, village owner that provides at least some level of affordable housing can qualify to transfer excess FAR. And the amount of the transfer for type of transaction where it's just in the market, private transaction between buyer, just to be determined. That's something that you would work out with a potential buyer. Now, what if there is no willing buyer? So we have in the works also this concept of the FAR bank, where if there is no willing buyer but there is excess FAR, the city purchase the FAR and hold it until a willing buyer comes along. The details of that are in the works. Another way in which developers can get some financing is through some of the floor area payment trust fund. The way this works is that private developers can buy excess FAR from the city in connection with any property owned by the city in the plan area. And in that case, the purchase price for that FAR is preset in the plan based on a predetermined formula that takes into account land value and is discounted by 60%. So a developer that needs additional FAR could buy free, and then at least 50% of that purchase price would go into the floor area payment trust fund. One of the limited uses of the trust fund is affordable housing. So that's just a broad overview of some of these financing mechanisms. There's some unique opportunities both for financing through land use and also provide financing through land use. But this is essentially a description, and we can certainly open it up for questions. And so, I don't know if you want to add anything.
The last piece, too, is that if your projects conform to the base CASP standards, you actually get administrative clearance. So you have an expedited permitting process. And then no time is money.
Yeah, and really the way the plan is working is that the housing you provide and then sort of up to 100%, the more incentives and density you get. So there's also a provision in there that talks about incentives that you might need, consistent with the density bonus. But if you need something greater, there's also a provision in the plan that allows for that. So do we want to just, it might be actually a good idea if we could get a sense from people of developers that want to build in the area. So I'm wondering if we could sort of have an opportunity to do that.
Sure. What I can do is I'm going to unmute all of the attendees, so folks can just give a second here. Set this up. Let's see. Sorry, second here. Let's see. So I'll set up here. Sure. Give all the days. Okay, well, folks, I'm actually going to unmute everyone here to allow our question and answers. Hello?
Everybody able to, I mean, maybe I could just ask for a show of yeses or something for those who are interested in building in the area.
Well, Bob or Jim, can you hear me? Can you say something? Would that be?
Is not a developer though.
I just wanted to make sure the mic's working.
Okay.
Okay, folks. I've unmuted all of our attendees, so feel free to ask questions or interact with our panelists at this point. Can folks hear?
This is Jim. I do have a kind of a general question, if I may ask.
Sure.
Can you briefly describe the effort it took to the city to this on the zoning and development standard issues?
And I think that there are folks from the city, I think, even on this call, so who should feel free to weigh in as well. But to see if you want to answer that, if you want me to answer that.
It took a lot of so basically, part of the problem was that the city wanted to upzone because they didn't want to. They thought it was bad to do, density development because of greenhouse gases. So what we were saying is that we're not against, upping zoning, but we felt that it was going to undermine the existing city's density. And so we're arguing back and forth about what is the most likely development outcomes. And so they were arguing that this was good for the environment to just upzone for everybody. And so basically, because at the time, Northeastern University had just come out with a study that said that if you, upzone and build transit-oriented developments in low-income neighborhoods and don't consider equity issues and affordable housing, you actually get to see an increase in greenhouse gases because core transit users are getting pushed out by recreational transit users, right? And so you see a drop in the number of people who are using public transit and then an increase in the number of people using private vehicles. It was armed with that information. We were able to get environmentalists on our side. So what ended up happening was the city said, well, this is good for transportation. So we got the transportation folks on our side. So they're arguing this was good for economic development. So after a lot of lobbying, we got labor on our side. And at the same time, we had Joe do a financial analysis, which, you kind of saw a taste of to kind of look at what happens with affordable housing opportunities if you increase density for everybody. And so we were able to get financial analysis to prove that the city's presumptions about what was likely to happen with development called into question. And that's when Kaiser Marston's came in, and that they were funded, or they were paid by the California Community Foundation to an analysis of what happens when you increase the zoning just outright. And so the slide itself, move one, you can see land values without changing anything jump from $3 million to $7 million for an acre of land in the CASP. And so what we saw was that was going to increase real estate speculation, but the other thing too was because it was going to increase land values, and if you treat residential developers the same way as you treat commercial and industrial, then the commercial developers, well, they started complaining, saying that they weren't going to be able to compete for land, and they came out in support of our proposal too. So when we started, nobody was talking about affordable housing, equity and community needs, and by the end of it, everybody was supporting the city's version of the plan. But after a 3 campaign with extensive lobbying, we were able to basically get everybody else on our side and nobody on the city side. So it took a work.
Thank you.
All right. Sissy and Shasha, we actually have a few online questions as well on the chat box. Tim O'Connell is asking 3 questions. Let me go through all 3. Could someone describe the thinking behind the finding that going to 4 or 5 FAR would result in a diminution of value? The second question he asks is, would the FAR bank get its funding? The city loan or grant funds to the bank, and they'll under what terms? And the question he asks is the administrative clearance of the heightened unit count mandates of Rod Yaroslavsky no growth measure 1906 Prop U, whether it sort of fits that.
I'm gonna. Okay. So hi Tim. So I think that the first thing about the FAR, it's really taking into account the costs of steel construction. So in that sort of, what is your return on equity if you bid that level? So answer your question, or do you like, is it?
I think he's in the chat box.
Okay. Oh, sorry, because I can't hear him.
Yeah. Well, the second question he asked is, where would the FAR bank get its funding?
And that is a question. So all of the details of the FAR bank have to get worked out in a separate ordinance. And so I think that's all to be determined. But the concept was very highly, basically loved by everybody, and I think a lot of people saw a lot of potential in the idea. So again, the details would need to be really worked out, and I know there's folks from the city potentially on the call, so feel free to weigh in on that if you would like to.
Okay. The third question he asked was whether the administrative clearance would avoid heightened unit count mandates. Yeah.
Heightened. Sorry, so you're talking about the Prop U?
Yeah, exactly. 1986 Prop U.
Tim, you've stumped me. I think it would, but we'd have to double check.
Okay. Any other questions? By all attendees, you should appoint ability to essentially ask a question.
Yeah, while we're waiting, I mean, I can just say that, like, having talked to at least some non-developers about this plan, the concept and the idea of basically being able to sell the excess FAR is quite attractive. I think, again, in terms of finding a willing buyer are one of those things that that will and can come up. You have to find a receiver site in the specific plan area, and so there are some timing issues with the sale of the excess FAR, but there's also not a limit on the time in which you could sell. I mean, you could sort of time, during the duration of a project, you have the opportunity to sell your excess FAR. And the other thing just to note is that the way that the plan is designed is that a market rate developer who have excess FAR, like I said, first, in residential context, first has to go through the affordable housing bonus option and provide some level of affordable housing before they can sell their FAR.
Let me make sure that folks understand. Okay, would you ask Jim Wong's question? Are you able to demonstrate the need for such reduced parking requirements?
Not sure that there was a need. I think that was already something the city had felt like was necessary. There wasn't much. I mean, Sissy, you can win, but we were actually, I think that at the end, because of the fact that we were able to come up with a comprehensive proposal that included affordable housing at the 1.5 FAR level, you know, it was able to work such that the land values and the parking reductions and the increase in FAR together created a respectable return on equity. I don't remember having much in city opposition to reduced parking.
When we came in and found the plan, they had already set a parking maximum of 1 space per unit. We wanted to play around with current parking standards already as it was. So we weren't doing anything new or radical in that sense. I think that part of the issue was that we were arguing that those parking reductions were in the pocket of developers and not necessarily something that could be, you know, that it was another tool that was often used to take the density bonus incentives. And so we felt like reducing parking going to, again, undermine the city's density bonus. So after a lot of negotiations for a lot of different reasons, we settled on like parking minimums and maximums. There are other controls, so it's not like you could, you know, 10 spots per unit, you know, but there's a lot more flexibility because we felt like that flex would also really benefit the affordable developers.
I have actually one more question. A response from Tim. I think he has a problem with his microphone. The issue with the FAR bank is that anyone who builds at less than the maximum FAR has to find someone who wants to build over the economically reasonable FAR, which makes no economic sense. They're going to want a bank to act as a buyer of last resort.
So basically, if you're a buyer, if you're a seller, then you have excess FAR. So for example, as a 100% affordable developer, you're not going to build past 3 because the cost of construction moving from wood frame to steel frame is going to be so cost prohibitive. Basically, think about it as like a graph. You know, income or return on equity is kind of like, it looks like an N, where it increases substantially the profit margins between 1 and 3, but drops off precipitously at 4 FAR and doesn't pick up again until 9, right? So you wouldn't see a profit margin until like 9 FAR. But the problem is that, you know, given the way that the neighborhood's built out, you know, 9 FAR wasn't an appropriate density level for the neighborhood. And so basically the maximum FAR you can build in the region is going to be 6.0 FAR. But because of construction technology, you're going to make a profit. And so for non-developers, you're going to go to 3 and then sell the 4, you know, whether it's to finance existing projects, you know, your existing project.
Nobody's going to buy it.
I think, no, Tim, I think I understand your question. What you're saying is that if a market rate developer has already provided affordable housing and gotten up to 3 FAR, would he need to buy or want to buy more?
No, can you hear me?
Now, yes.
Excellent. Okay. No, it's whether they're not market rate or not. Economics go upside down at a 4 FAR, which, you know, cost of construction, once you that type of construction and you're putting in steel, it does, until you get to, you're saying 9, and I've seen other estimates that were higher. there's never going to be a buyer because nobody's going to build a building with a 9 FAR in that market.
So here's the thing. If
so all build to 3, or maybe for other reasons they'll decide they're only going to build to 2 because some site characteristic or some particular characteristic of development. And they're going to want to sell the extra. And the bank is going to have to be the buyer of last resort. They'll buy it, and they'll be stuck with it. So he is buying a development right that nobody can use because nobody can ever come back and buy it.
So the idea is it provides flexibility for market rate developers. So let's say you're at 1.5 FAR and you want to increase your density to 2, but you don't want, for whatever reason, like let's say you're a commercial developer and you're not going to build affordable housing, you can just buy the excess FAR, right, to get you to 2. Right? You can either provide the affordable housing on site or you can buy excess FAR from somebody to get your project to where you want it to be.
Right. Situation where you have a base of 1.5 and you want to get to 2.5.
So you're discriminate against profit-seeking developers.
The
by setting the FAR for them lower.
The transfer of FAR provision, anybody can sell their excess FAR, but it is true that the deep affordability, the greater FAR you get, and that's consistent with, the density bonus scheme. Most incentive-based schemes provide more density for more affordable housing, and then all this does is say, okay, well, and if you have excess density, you can sell it.
If you look on the chat box, we also have a question from Jim Wong. What would be the key elements of the deed restrictions on the affordable units?
Well, I think those are drafted so as to match up with the density bonus program, LA City's Affordable Housing Incentives Ordinance, which is the implementing ordinance for the density bonus program. So it's basically everything that is required under density bonus law. I think that's 45-year covenant.
Mm-hmm.
And the benefit of monitoring from the housing department.
All right, just want to set a reminder that everyone, attendees to this webinar have been unmuted. So, you are free to essentially unmute, to log into your microphone or phone and ask questions of our panelists. So, do we have additional questions? Okay.
I mean, maybe if anyone was has been thinking about working in this area or has already looked at the plan, it'd be interesting for us to know. And
yeah, hey, Sasha, I do have a question. Actually, one of Sasha, where could folks get additional information on this plan?
We. Well, I mean, the plan itself is very, very dense,
okay.
But we could sort of share out the 2 sort of chapters of the plan that describe all these incentives and the TFAR. If people think that would be helpful, it gets complicated because there's different formulas. Like if there's a river buffer area where the incentives are a little bit less because they want to have a buffer between the river and any development. So it's like we've described right now is a pretty general description of both the incentive programs and the transfer FAR programs. So we're happy to share those chapters of the plan that describe everything in greater detail.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Okay. That Bob?
Yes.
Okay, great. How to do that. And Sissy and I are, I think the last page of the PowerPoint is our contact information. So if people do have questions, like we're happy to try to answer them or refer you to to someone who might be able to. And we're very interested in obviously helping sure that the plan results in the affordable housing that it is intended to result in. And so if people are thinking about building there, we'd like to help.
Great.
Okay.
Fantastic. Okay, last call. Everybody, everybody is unmuted. So this will be the last call. If you have a question, let us know now. And as no more questions. Shashi and Sissy.
And thank you for setting this up. And I know for the city folks that are on, thank you for your ultimate support of the plan. And
okay. Would it be okay for us to send out the PowerPoint presentation as well as your contact information for us today?
I think so, but maybe I actually have a few edits I want to make, so maybe in a day or two.
All right.
Okay.
So, folks, you will be getting a copy of today's presentation with all the contact information for our panelists. Probably early next week. So sending that out because I know folks will probably follow questions in their mind that they might be thinking of. So we'll make sure that gets out to everyone, and we want to definitely thank our presenters, Sissy Trin, the Executive Director with SEACA, the Southeast Asian Media Alliance, as well as Shashi with Public Counsel Law Center today. Thank you for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Two quick reminders. The www.scamp.org, because we have two great events coming up. On the 4th, we will be doing a symposium on housing the reentry population. More information is available on the website. June 10th, we will be doing an update workshop on ADA, the American Act. It's an important training for developers as well as designers and construction folks. So those two trainings are coming up, and those information is available on our website.
Thank you, everybody.